Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is Liz Pedro. I'm here today, and I want to, first of all, give apologies for Bill Lee. He's having some problems logging on. And can you see my GoToWebinar session there? Okay, let me just shrink it down a little bit. Or can you just see my presentation? There we go.
I can see your presentation.
Okay, so first of all, Bill's having some problems with the phone. So he apologizes, and he's going to figure it out, and he'll be able to join us soon. So I want to welcome you to this webinar, and I want to thank Bill for this opportunity, and David Schroka from Point of Reference for helping me out with this presentation. And to the attendees that are joining us today, welcome. You're in for a treat. In less than 60 minutes, you will learn how to build and launch a reference program, all of which only took me 8 years, so I think you'll enjoy this. The title of this webinar is Fundamentals for New and Emerging Customer Reference Programs. Now, this is part 1. Part 2 will be given at the 2013 Summit on Customer Engagement, March 5th through 6th in Redwood City, California. Now, for the sake of time, and because we are covering 8 years worth of material in an hour, if you could hold your questions until the end, that would be appreciated, and then we'll be able to address any at that time. Okay, and just one second. All right, so introductions. Before we get started, let's introduce ourselves. So my name is Liz Pedro. I am the Customer Programs Manager at ShoreTel. I have 24 years experience in marketing and sales, and I've built new reference programs at 4 companies. Also joining me today, I'm pleased to be joined by David Schroka. He is the President and CEO of Point of Reference, which turns 10 years old this spring, so happy early birthday. David is President. Thank you. So he's the President and CEO of Point of Reference. He has a lot of experience. He's got everything from sales and sales management to product management and professional services management. And he has literally helped hundreds of companies with reference programs. So we'd like to welcome him. Now, the agenda, yes?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay, you're welcome. So the agenda today is pretty straightforward. First of all, we're going to talk about discovery. Second, plan development. Third, program launch. And fourth, additional resources. So discovery. The first step before you do anything is you should do discovery. This is an important part of building your program right, so you need to take the time to do diligent discovery. Now, the first thing I like to do, and is highly recommended, is identify your stakeholders. This is an important key to building a successful reference program, is you need to know and have support from your right stakeholders. So in this graphic, I list 7 stakeholders, which include marketing, public relations, analyst relations, and IR, investor relations, which I lump into one category, sales, partners, services, support, and consulting, engineering, and executives. And don't worry, we're going to dive into some of the key ones in this presentation. For myself, the key stakeholder for me for every program I've run has always been sales. I don't know if it's because I have a background with sales or just because they see the value from it. But again, we'll dive into that a little bit more. David, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So on the topic of stakeholder interviews, when we work with companies to get sort of a lay of the land of their current program and current processes, practices, et cetera, we often begin with one-on-one stakeholder interviews. And these interviews are usually with executives, if we're talking about the reference manager, his or her peers, so that would be people in PR, analyst relations, investor relations, product management, field marketing, et cetera. And we always make sure to include those people that have been pre-identified as influencers. They're the people that you kind of know internally have the ability to make things happen or not, and they can be your best allies or your biggest obstacles. So you always want to include them in that. And in all those bubbles in the previous slide, we really focus on the consumers of references and reference content when we do these shareholder interviews, or stakeholder interviews rather. And we don't take a lot of their time. You know, you don't need more than 15 minutes per individual. The 3 main things you want to get out of those conversations are, if you don't know them very well in particular, what their previous experience was to customer reference programs from other companies they may have worked at. That always sort of gives you some context for everything else that they say. If they say, oh, I've never been at a company with any kind of formal program, that helps. And the reverse is true too. So then you want to find out how things are working in the current environment for their needs. Again, if you're talking to PR, AR, or investor relations, they're all going to have different perspectives. And then the last thing is I like to ask the question, what would spell success for you if you were to fast forward, let's say, 6 months from now? You know, what kinds of criteria would define success? And so that really helps sort of set everything up. Now, these are the one-on-one interviews, and the next slide, Liz is going to talk more about getting information from the sales team through surveys, which is also an important input.
Okay, so one of the important another important thing to do, like David said, is to survey your sales force. So basically, you should survey them to help you understand your current practices, to capture the before state. So you know how whenever they have weight loss programs, you always have the before and after picture. So your goal with the sales survey is to find the before. So for example, how long does it take to fulfill references today? So another key part of your survey is to identify any gaps and then how important the reference program components are. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the Net Promoter Score, and basically what you're looking for with that is you want the sales reps to say how important is it to them. So if they say that they're not really as worried about, let's say, case studies, which isn't true, but case studies, then you would know that's probably not one of the first areas for you to focus on. So other examples, how important is it they get references filled in 48 hours? How satisfied are they with the current state of things? And again, this helps you prioritize where the biggest gaps are. And here's a few tips that David and I put together. Don't think you're bothering sales. In our experience, and we both talked about this last week, they're more than happy to talk about this part of their work. They love getting input, and trust me, a lot of them, they don't always get asked input on things. Survey every person in sales, including management, account managers, inside sales, major accounts, channel sales, etc. And if you use the right tool, you can segment that by who answered what questions and actually be specific on how, what the needs are by type of role. Another thing is ask for feedback on how to build your program. Sales reps and employees come from companies all shapes and sizes, and they always have great ideas. Maybe another program has a best practice that you can bring into yours. And one interesting thing I learned by asking sales for input is they usually feel more vested as you're building your reference program. They feel like they are helping you build it. Now, I talked a little bit before about the survey. You're looking for the gaps. This is a huge differentiator. When I came to ShoreTel, I worked for a great director who's all about gap analysis, conduct your gap analysis. So it's a pretty big differentiator that I've done here that I've been able to find huge value in it. What currently exists, what's missing? Who consumes your customer evidence? Where do users go to get customer evidence? What reference program materials and info already exists, if any? For example, when I usually come to a company, one of the first things I'm amazed at is people don't know where the case studies live online. So I put that in my signature line in my email. So you're looking for those kind of gaps. And one thing that David pointed out on a call we had was consider your current demand and future demand. What are your products shipping this year, but also what's shipping in 6 months that you can keep your eyes and your ears open for as you build your gaps. And it's pretty important because how do you know what to focus on first? And as many of you probably know, we're pretty busy people. And so we need to actually prioritize on what works on first. So one of my recommendations, and this is why I asked David to be on the call, was the point of reference maturity model assessment tool is an incredibly valuable tool to help you build your gaps. And I've actually been using it at all 4 companies I'm at, and so I have to give huge kudos to David and his team for putting this together because it has really revolutionized how I've done reference programs. So I just wanted to move on, and if you want to introduce that, Dave?
Sure. Yeah, the maturity model is a tool that we designed initially for our own purposes when we consulted with customers that were building a program or wanted to take a step back and look at the current state of the program and sort of map things out in terms of, let's say, 3, 6, 12-month goals. And so what we did was sort of break down the components of a reference program into 11 different elements. Things like what we call horizontal integration, how you work with other groups within marketing or product marketing or field marketing or the sales team, whatever. How you work with the leadership group within your company, or managing upward as we call it, and so on. So we've got 11 different areas. We've got within each of those 11 areas 4 stages of evolution that we have labeled from undeveloped all the way through advanced. And then, you know, because it really requires some description for each of those stages, you know, what does this stage look like? What does focused look like in the case of managing upward? What does advanced look like in the case of managing upward? We put in a series of bullets that describe each of those stages. So you can read through them and say, oh yeah, this is our stage right now. And then you can look at the stages ahead of that and see what kind of things would take you to the next level. So that's really the basis of the maturity model. And it will help you understand where you're at today. You can be sort of self-critical for just a moment as you're going through that, but then really focus on the future and start to prioritize what things you should put your effort into. And if you work in an environment, let's say you're starting a program, or maybe one is sort of in an infant stage, and you've got a counterpart in other geographies, we always recommend that each of the geographies take this. You'll find really different results, and then there may be a set of common goals, and there may be a set of goals that are more geo-specific. If you go to the next slide then, here we're looking at one of the elements, program vision. So as you read through each of these descriptions, as I said, find the one that closest matches your environment, circle it, and the last page of this tool, and this tool will be available to you after the seminar if you're interested for download. At the bottom, at the very end of this tool, you'll find the section where you can put your check marks in. Liz says that she often goes through this and actually puts a date in, so she's tracking it over time, which is something that we're also proponents of. You know, maybe every quarter you revisit where you are and see how you're making progress and where you want to go next. And then on the next slide, I've got an example of a write-up that we do when this is part of a workshop that we do. So we come up with, for each of these areas, we list what your self-assessment was, we list the accomplishments that we feel have been made, as well as the opportunities. And then the list of opportunities becomes your laundry list of potential things to work on. And how you prioritize those, you know, that's very much up to you, and we cover a section on that a little bit later in terms of how to prioritize. But the piece here that's really important is that executives in companies that have not had a formal program often view the reference program as a sinkhole of cost. You know, they give it resources, they don't know how to measure its results, they don't feel like it's a formal program, and so they're reticent to put enough behind it, enough support, and that translates to resources and budget to really make it flourish. And so taking this more formal approach to analyzing where you're at and where you want to go demonstrates that you have a method, that this is a discipline like anything else in marketing, you know, like lead gen is a discipline, that you've got very clear goals, they're going to be measurable, and when you need to ask for resources, you can easily explain why. You know, here are our goals, but we're not going to be able to achieve those unless we have X. Now, if you don't feel like it's important for us to achieve these particular goals in, you know, the next 3 months, maybe we can shoot for it in 6 months or 12 months or whatever it might be. But it always ties back to this formal process.
Okay. So now that you've done your discovery, and those are just some pieces that we pulled together, there's a lot to discovery. You should do, you know, take your time to do it right, and sometimes it can take a month, sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months. So make sure you spend enough time, and of course you'll continue to do more discovery as you go on, but you really need to take that time to do it. So now that your discovery's been completed, it's time to develop your plan. And I'm a big plan person. I love this area. So the first thing to do is defining program vision. So the first question you have to ask yourself, what is your program's purpose? Because this will influence everything. If you're just going to be doing sales references to help close more deals, then that's going to be the direction that your program goes. If you're in the Marcom group and your job is just to do case studies, then that will be your direction that you go. So that's going to influence a lot of things, is what is your purpose. Next, define your program overview and objectives. And I just want to tell you, it's important that you define this so that somebody else doesn't. So if you go in and you write your plan really well, and you put together your program overview and objectives, if somebody comes in and says, no, your role is this, you've defined your program. This is your program. So another part of it is developing the program scope. Again, is it sales references? Is it press references? Is it customer intelligence? What is your scope? Is it everything? We only have so many hours in a day, which I guess I haven't learned that lesson yet. So are you going to handle everything that's part of a reference program? Or are you just going to focus on a few areas? Maybe phase 1 is sales references. Phase 2, you can build on the other areas more. Are you going to focus on global or North America? Here at ShoreTel, I just came in mostly doing North America, but then the other geos saw what I was doing, and they want me to help them with theirs. Are you going to cover all industries? I think it's Oracle that has over 120 employees in their customer organization. Some do surveys, but they have a pretty large reference team. And so I believe either by, they're really narrow by product. Some of the companies, you focus by industry. Some of them focus on enterprise or, SMB, small, medium business. So I think, I'm trying to think of some examples of, it's important that, you define your scope. One example of that, and I think Dave might touch on this later, but if the growth of your company is 100% year over year, what will you need to grow your team and your program? And again, I think we're touching on that later. And again, we're going to talk about stakeholders because that is really important. Let me move on to that one again. So I covered this earlier, but let me drill down a little bit on this. Some stakeholders are going to support you while you support others, and I want to walk through these. So marketing, you support them with customer success examples, but they support you with collateral on your website. So they're probably the most important stakeholder, one of the most important that we work with. As far as public relations, analyst relations, IR, you might do customer press releases. Here at ShoreTel, I do new wins, but I also do momentum. So if they had it for a year, I also do by industry. So we'll do it by banking and credit union, and I will have quotes from a bunch of them. So you'll work with them that way. Media requests, I write blog articles. There's the Gartner Magic Quadrant you provide customers for, and quarterly earnings announcements. The sales team, we're going to actually cover that in a few slides later because that is so critical. Partners. Does your company sell through channel partners? Here at ShoreTel, we are a 100% channel-driven company. Not only that, but our customers have a partner of record. And so that really changed how I get references and how I work with partners getting the references. Services, support, and consulting. This is a great stakeholder you shouldn't overlook because they can give you reference leads and they'll give you more insights into your customers. Engineering, you'll work with them on beta customers for product launches. And executives, we're going to cover that later as well. But get to know these stakeholders, take them out to lunch, do whatever you need to do. But every one of these stakeholders are key to the success of your program. So again, take time to identify those and how you'll work with them. So going on to the next one, David's going to cover this one about executive sponsors.
Yeah, and there's one major point to get across here, and that is that turnover happens. So we see this all the time where we have a really well-adopted reference program, and there's, let's say, the sponsor is the CMO or the VP of Sales Enablement or VP of Sales Ops or something, and there's turnover. He leaves, she leaves, they move roles, something happens, and suddenly the replacement, not such a huge advocate of customer references. And I'm sure that all of you have had some experience with this at different companies, and it can just be completely devastating to a customer reference program. So our advice is always don't settle for just your reporting structure having that level of support. If you're in the marketing department, you have your VP of marketing as a firm supporter or the CMO, but try and branch out and find others wherever they may be. Certainly sales VPs are important. You might find champions in product management or product marketing, field marketing, and of course, again, if you're in marketing, you would be looking at sales ops or sales enablement as well as champions. So spread it out and keep them apprised of how you're doing with the program and some of the results that you've got, and that'll go a long way should turnover occur to sustaining the same level of support in the executive ranks. So field sales relationship, obviously it's critical to have sales behind you if, again, that's one of your primary stakeholders. And we have a lot of clients who their reference program begins as purely furnishing leads and references for PR purposes. And so if sales is a big stakeholder in your ecosystem, then you need to get close to them. How do you get close to them? Well, you start to attend sales meetings. You start to be on the calls that they have. You're at the in-person events. You know, you put a face to this function of customer reference management and get to be known. We talked about sales surveys. That's important. At the beginning, it's also important to do it on an ongoing basis, whatever that frequency is. We have some clients who do it on a semi-annual basis, some on an annual basis. Quarterly is awesome, but sometimes there's some pushback from communications or from the sales organization that says, you know, they're getting other surveys and other communications. Let's keep it a little bit more minimalistic. We're also really in favor of forming advisory boards early on. And one of the nicest ways to approach this is to get the candidates for this advisory board nominated by their leaders, their managers. So it's not you going out and asking people, you know, could you do me a favor and be part of the sales advisory board? Turn that around and make it something that they want to be in. It requires a manager's nomination, and so it has a little more prestige to it. And, you know, your criteria, we have a whole blog post on this if you go to our site and find and do a search for advisory boards. But picking the right people is important. You know, you want the ones that they have the bigger picture in mind. You know, they have the ability to see how this benefits the whole. They're opinionated people. They're not wallflowers. They're people that will make the time to show up to the periodic advisory board meetings, etc. And if you give that criteria to the sales leadership, they'll for sure pick out the right people. But treat them as your focus group, and they can be used for all sorts of things. Feedback on, you know, the system that you choose to maintain your customer reference program and what kind of search criteria ought to be available in it, or the types of content, etc. It's a wide range of topics that they can be useful with. And it's nice to put together a welcome kit, a sales kit for the sales team about the reference program, which could include, you know, what are the services you offer? What are your service level agreements? How much time should be anticipated, lead time, to deliver on those things? You know, what are some of the processes they need to follow for certain things? Maybe it's a nomination process or whatever it might be. And what resources are you offering as a program? You know, is there a folder somewhere on the network drive? Is there a tool? Do you have a database? Are there other types of kits, maybe or vertical kits or something that kind of group references together that could be useful from an industry perspective? And it's good to catch salespeople early on in their careers at your organization. We did a survey a while ago, and we asked about, you know, how often the sales team makes use of the reference program. And one of the questions we asked was early on in the survey was, how long have you been with the company? And we saw a very direct correlation to the newer they were to the company, the more they leaned on the reference program, which makes sense. You know, over time you can build up your own sort of cache of customer references, but in the beginning you really have to rely on the total pool and the resources in a reference program. So those are some of the key things to getting closer to the sales force and aligning what you offer to them, so that you know, you're really truly targeted on the things that they need to do their job, and you can show impact from the program perspective. Now, building a recruiting engine is probably the foundation of everything you're going to do if you're really early on, because you have to have enough customer references in your database, whatever that may be, to fulfill requests, even if it's self-servicing. You have to have enough customer references that you can tap to convert to some sort of content, whether that's video or case study or guest blogs or whatever that might be, social media pieces. So you need to approach this as if it's not a nice to have but a must have. So it is a discipline. It requires that there's a cadence. In other words, you can't start it, do a few calls, or whether those are to salespeople or directly to customers, you can't start it and then drop it for a couple of weeks because, one thing comes up or another. And I know it's tough because a lot of people juggle many roles, but you have to really approach it as something that you carve out, either a piece of each day or a couple days a week that you can focus on. You just have to be really persistent about it, because the challenge is that you can get into a very reactive mode, especially at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, and the fires are burning all around you, and then of course everything settles down after the end of that period, and you focus on other things, and then it repeats. So it's deja vu every end of period, whatever that is, unless you take a proactive approach. And one of the things in terms of taking a proactive approach is aligning to your company goals. So it's important to be able to satisfy the current demand of reference requests. It's also important to be able to see over the horizon and anticipate, as Liz mentioned, new product launches. It might be new industry verticals that you're going after as a company. It might mean new geographies. It might be that you're expanding your partner channel. Whatever those initiatives are, it's really critical that the reference program is there to support it and able to show how it ties into achievement of company goals. That's one way that you preserve executive sponsorship. We talked about gaps earlier. We talked about the current, identifying current gaps and as well as future. One of the things we tell people all the time in terms of current gaps is get a pipeline report. Find out where the demand is, either along product lines, vertical lines, combinations of things, geography, whatever. You can do some slicing and dicing on that pipeline report. You can see where the bulk of the demand is, and that tells you, well, we should really have a beefed up presence in terms of customer references in our database or content in these areas. And in terms of future, of course, it's again back to those company initiatives and being tied into those. You should establish an ideal candidate profile. You should know what the sales team needs. If it's director level, then great, you go after directors. If it's VP or C level, you go after VPs and C level. And they each have different needs in terms of how you approach them. But that's a whole other topic. But know what you're looking for, know the roles. Are you looking for technical? Are you looking for business, influencers, decision makers, etc.? And make sure that that's how you're beginning your recruiting process. So it's more rifle approach and not shotgun. Sources for getting candidates for the program are, of course, sales nominations. That's an easy one. Everybody turns to sales. They're, of course, really busy, although you can get their attention in some cases, depends on your culture, with some contests. And that's a philosophical question about whether you incent or not to get those leads. You can get great leads from customer surveys, just plain old satisfaction surveys, or Liz mentioned earlier, Net Promoter surveys. Those are really great too. And for those of you familiar with Net Promoter, there's really one core question about your willingness to refer the company to a friend or a colleague. And it's a 0 to 10 scale. 9s and 10s are what are considered promoters. And so you can easily skim off those 9s and 10s out of the survey results and know that these are probably your best candidates. You can maybe even drop down to the 8s as well. And then there's always the possibility of having a nomination page on your corporate website. It might be a self-nomination page. It might be for partners to use in the partner portal. Whole different, set of nominations come through those channels. And I think that's it. If you want to say something about Net Promoter in your organization, though, Liz, I think that would probably be good to hear.
Okay. So just going back a little, so so at ShoreTel, what we do is we have our Net Promoter survey, and we have a really amazing team that works on the Net Promoter. So what I did early on when I came in is we get customers who say we threw in, are you willing to be a reference? So we take the yeses, and then I look at, are they a Net Promoter? And I'm pretty specific on who I allow be in here. So it's 8, 9s, and 10s. So a customer has to meet 3 criteria to come to me as a reference lead. They have to say yes to being a reference. They have to be a Net Promoter, but they also have to be, I believe it's the satisfied question. I'd have to go back and look. And I'm really picky. I only want the cream of the crop. I don't want anybody that's going to give us a bad reference. So just a little point on that is I have thousands of references and reference leads, which makes me a very happy reference manager. So Dave was pretty impressed. So I just wanted to mention that's one way I get my references. Yeah, it's actually over 5,000. But anyway, so in other jobs, I've had to spend a lot of time trying to find references and begging sales. And so now what I do is I let these come to me, and then they go into my spreadsheet. And if somebody needs a reference, I can search by industry because I get all the information about these folks. I can search by industry, city, and state, and if they're a reference lead and not qualified yet, I can go to the partner, the salesperson, or occasionally to the customer. So I just wanted to point that out. It's a very effective process that's worked for us very well. So now we're going to talk about putting this into a document. So one of the first things you're going to do, you'll take the discovery findings and then the actions from those. So maybe you found that sales is happy with you. Maybe that's not a priority you have to worry about right away, but they haven't done any customer press releases in a couple years. So then you can, it will help you, whatever you've discovered, it will help you, it'll help create the actions. Put into the plan your key program components, resources needed. Now this is really important too. It's not just what you need today, but like I said, if you're growing 100% year over year, as we know some of high-tech companies can, it's the resources you need today, but what about tomorrow? What staffing, maybe you need yourself now, but you can see in a year you're going to need somebody to help with sales references. And even the budget. Maybe now you just use a spreadsheet, but then you see in 6 months or a year you're going to need a customer reference management system, which we'll be talking about later. Another thing is develop processes. I don't know if it's because I'm so OCD or I've just done this a few times. I'm a very process-driven person, so I always make processes that should take 3 days to review a story. It should take 1 day turnaround for design. I'm just very into that because I have to have things organized. And scripts. And I think this one, I don't know how many people do this, but this one's really been helpful. I worked in call centers for 12 years and used scripts a lot, and I was a manager and just found that some people naturally on the phone, if you're going to call and ask for a reference, it's not natural for everybody to just do that. So what I do is I have scripts if I'm going, and I have phone and email ones, and then I can use those to ask for certain things. Another thing is your service level agreements, your timelines, and for example, I try to do a reference request in 48 hours, but then if it's going to be a site visit, that will take longer, so I say that it's 5 days. And a lot of these things I have defined, nobody's ever asked to see them, but it's just what I use to help me keep my sanity. Okay, now data. What information, you need to ask yourself also, what information do you need for your reference database to support your stakeholders? What do you need? You need companies and contacts? Do you want to also have what products? Maybe only have one product. That's not a big deal. But some companies, like here, I have quite a few different ones. What versions are they on? How many licenses do they have? I remember the first time I was a reference manager, I shouldn't say this, but I got asked for a reference request, and I turned around and used a Fortune 100 company for the reference. And one thing I didn't ask was what size was the customer asking for a reference. I think they had like 50. And I ended up giving them a reference for somebody that has like 10,000 users. So it's important to track that information in your database and your head so that you can make sure you're providing the right match for reference requests. Also integrations. Here at ShoreTel, we do a lot of integrations and a lot of interoperability with HP, a lot of integrations, Outlook, whatever. I try to capture that. My job was I was hired to stop all the emails going to pound sales. And so that's what I try to capture as much as comes out of that. Also, what business drivers, what competitive information. I capture what displacement it was, and also if it was a win over the other company. And of course, you're not going to know this about everybody. I don't know this about my thousands of people. But when I do capture it, and everybody says, go to Liz, she has it. Now, where do you go to get this information? So is it going to be your CRM? Or is it going to be finance, IT, or services? Who has your customer database? And for example, what I do at ShoreTel is I don't do just references. I also do something called name droppers. So I'll give you an example of that is for some reason, whenever the Boy Scouts are looking at ShoreTel, they always want to know what other councils are using ShoreTel. And so I have customer lists that I will go in and do a filter on and get a list of what Boy Scout councils have bought ShoreTel. And if that kind of makes sense, how I do that. So you can, somebody's going to go to, a large company, who else in their industry is using it? Because we all know that peers have a lot of influence when you're buying software or anything else. Because if your neighbor's driving a BMW, maybe you'll want to drive a BMW. So another interesting thing on data is I actually did analysis on correlation and found a correlation between the top salespeople that were asking for references, and then the top salespeople actually were asking for the most references. And so I kind of have published that out to sales and said, hey, the top 10% of our sales force, they're using the reference program, twice as much as the rest of you. And so it's been a big push to help my reference program be successful. And so that was just something I wanted to share with you as well. And David's going to go right into systems.
Okay, yeah, so systems, it's going to be dependent upon a lot of volume questions in your case. So do you have a lot of salespeople? Do you have a lot of volume of deals that need references? Do you have a lot of customer content? When we talk to companies about their technology, because we have a customer reference management offering, most of them are in spreadsheets, or they're using an Access database or SharePoint or something like that, and it works for a while. So spreadsheet might be the where you start, and then you get to a point where you need a web-based database that everybody can get to. You might be able to leverage your CRM system. Some of them have little modules that get you sort of started in the customer reference space. Salesforce is a good example of that. They have a little starter app called Customer Stories. It's good for content, but you'll probably evolve to the point where you have to fulfill on reference requests. You want to manage on a contact level their profiles. What are they willing to do? Are they willing to speak to the media? Are they willing to talk to analysts? Are they willing to take phone calls? Things like that. You'll need to start eventually maintaining that information and have some automation for submitting requests and processing requests, tracking that they've been fulfilled, which all leads, of course, to reporting. So this is kind of your evolution of things, going from spreadsheet all the way up to a purpose-built reference management system, as we would say. And there are plenty of options along the way there. In terms of metrics, it's important to probably distinguish your metrics into two categories. One is the metrics that you'll use as a reference team. These are the ones that help you understand, are you fulfilling in a reasonable time frame? Are you adding customer references to your database at a reasonable rate? Things like that. They're more activity-centric, if you will, a lot of counts. Those are great for you. In many cases, those don't really impress executives. Sometimes they do, and sometimes, more often, I would say they don't. What executives are interested in is business outcomes. So we've got some examples of both down at the bottom. Revenue influence is probably the #1 way of measuring the impact of a customer reference program from an executive perspective. So that's basically saying how many deals that closed made some use of customer reference program assets. And I say assets broadly because an individual who's willing to talk on the phone is an asset, as well as a case study or a video featuring that customer that was used maybe in the middle stage of the sales cycle. That's also something that had some influence. So you capture all of that. Or just looking at the total number of deals that closed and trying to target an increase in the percentage that included customer reference assets in some fashion. Maybe it's 25% today and you want to push it up to 40 or 50 or 60 or higher. The win rate. We have one client that did a study and showed that when references were used, the probability of winning the deal went up by 31%. So that's another way that you can track things. New references added, again, is more of a reference team measurement. Requests per month that were fulfilled, that's another reference team management, or average time to fulfill, as Liz says, she likes to keep these things in a process that she can measure and track and keep ordered. So these are important, just differentiate them based on the audience. Always ask your executive team, ultimately, what is it they want to see measured? Make sure you're tracking on that and fulfilling on the promise. Okay, so after you've sort of got all this information from stakeholders, from sales surveys, you've been doing your planning, you really have to probably think in terms of phases here. And we look at what can you accomplish in 30 days, what about a quarter, what about half a year, what about by the end of the year, things like that. You probably want to think about balancing your total goals between quick wins and longer-term goals. You know, you want to have a mix. You don't want to ignore the long-term goals because they do take time to achieve, and you want to show some quick wins so that everybody gets excited who's in your camp as well as sponsoring you. You need to identify those foundational goals, things that just absolutely have to happen before a whole slew of other things can happen. And that's kind of, the critical path in project management terms. You've got to identify those. For instance, if you're currently able to dedicate 10% of your time to the reference program, I think I would safely say, depending on the size of your organization, that you're not going to have a great chance of success. You might need to bump that up. Maybe it's a quarter, maybe it's 50%, maybe you need 100% of your time to be dedicated to the program. But those are probably foundational things that have to be addressed before you can do anything else. And then, of course, as you're trying to prioritize, it's going to be the intangibles. I'm sure most of you are savvy enough to know that sometimes there's political considerations, there's cultural things. Maybe you know about some changes that are coming down the road related to mergers or acquisitions or whatever. All those things might change the order of things that you decide to bite off and work on.
Okay. So the next step is to evangelize your plan. Now, years ago, I had a boss tell me your own PR is the most important PR you'll ever do. Because I used to be pretty shy. I didn't really want to go out and promote my program. But here's the thing. Your customer reference program is the product that you're selling. It's you. It's what you need to sell and get throughout the company. And as we know, if products don't sell, it's just really important. I won't go there, but it's really important. So a formalized plan demonstrates that reference management is a discipline. That takes it to a whole new level for some people that are stakeholders or management or executives. Once you formalize it, it kind of takes it to a whole new level. It shows that you're in tune with the corporate objectives. If you take the corporate objectives and then align your program to it, that really shows a lot of, that your program supports those. You also want to show your bases are covered. You have concrete measurable objectives. Also, you can articulate resource needs. You can provide scenarios. If we grow at this rate, then we need to do this. Now, I just wanted to give you some examples of how you can evangelize your plan. Do you have an annual sales conference? If you do, have a booth there. Promote your reference program just like anything else at the sales conference. Do you have a user conference? Can you present at your sales meetings? Do you have calls? We have a monthly call here internally for sales called Radio Shortail. I try to present on there every couple months so that I can make sure to keep the program top of mind for them. Product management, do they have staff meetings or events that you can participate in? So always be looking for those opportunities as you're building your plan. So once you have it built, then you're ready to go out and you can present it across the company. So now that you've done your discoveries and you've built your plan, now what? And it's time to launch your program. So one of the things you'll need to do is communications. And I talked about some of these, but internally, there's webinars that may be for sales, training sessions, employee website, email to sales and sales management. I try to send out an email every month, or it just depends on all the materials I have, but promoting new materials. And I also try to include quotes about the value of the reference program. Externally, you can have a website or partner communication. Just looking again for opportunities to communicate it. Years ago when I was at Novell, we had a treasure hunt. We launched a sales portal. So we had a treasure hunt where they had to dig through the portal to find the answers. And of course, we had some great prizes because salespeople like prizes. It got everybody to use the portal and learn where things were, and they loved the contest. Now, going back to the field sales relationship, you should try to attend any sales calls, meetings, events. There's a theme here. Join the email mailing list. Quarterly surveys. You did the survey before you started the program, but try to do a quarterly one to stay on top of it so that you can make sure that you're staying aligned with what they need. Sales onboarding, training, incentives, promotions, and contests. When I first got to LandDesk, I had a contest for every submission for a case study. Everybody would get one ticket. And then what I did is I gave away only $2,000 in prizes, and it was back in the day when the PSPs were really popular, and I had other great prizes, and it was such a small cost, but I got leads for, I think, like over 20 case studies that were really good. And, you know, those people are smart. They're like, ooh, one ticket, one chance to win for everyone that I submit. And I'm sure some of you know this if you've worked with sales. They're very, as David calls it, I'm sure others, WIIFM, what's in it for me? So basically, if they see something benefits them, then they're in. And so keep that in mind. And David also wanted to point out here, use your sales advisory board as your program sales team. They're your ambassadors. And so keep that in mind. Another thing I wanted to talk about was customer relationships. Customers love being references. Don't be afraid to ask. Pretty much there's an 80-20 rule at ShoreTel. It's a little bit better ratio, but sure, somebody's going to say no every now and then, but not everybody will. Respect their time, load balance, and use your sales skills when asking. So load balance is basically using all the same people all the same time. They're not going to be as willing to help out. So try to, you know, spread around the sales references that you're using. Look for opportunities. Well, let me talk first about the picture. The picture, his name is Scott Chambers. He works for a local company out here where they rent office space, and they're doing really well, Pacific Business Centers. And I met up with him, and since I've met up with him, we've done a case study, a video, all-hands employee meeting, and he spoke for us at an annual conference called Enterprise Connect. And the bonus for him, he did it for him. Professionally, he was seen as a leader. He's the chief operating officer there, and they actually got more business because of it. So you kind of have to keep your eye out. There are customers who are looking to be references, and they're looking for these opportunities to get published, to be quoted in an article, whatever. So you got to keep that in mind as you're asking. Look for opportunities to network with customers. Do you have user conferences, user groups, industry conferences? What I used to do, when I was at Landesk, we had an annual user conference, and I would get the attendee list beforehand, and I would actually look up how many licenses they had or what their big brand name was. And at the time, I had never heard of a company called Facebook. And so I was like, what is this Facebook? And so what I would do is highlight these companies, and then as I met people, I'd go around and meet people and shake their hands. They were really young guys, and I was like, what is this Facebook you guys are talking about? But I ended up leaving Landesk before they really blew, you know, the company grew, and I was able to do any marketing with them. Oh well, lesson learned. Okay, so some frequently asked questions that usually are posed on different LinkedIn groups or that I get. Data integrity. How do you keep your data integrity clean? So one thing I saw that Eloqua does that I like is you can do a quarterly email survey to your references, just doing a check-in. And if anybody wants to see a sample, I'll have my email at the end, and I'll send it to you. But just stay in touch with your references, make sure they're there. People change jobs, people leave, and so that's really important. Whatever reference tool you use, have it integrated with Salesforce, because then you can track so many things that way and make sure you're staying with the right contact. As far as incentives go, do you incent your customers that are references? Well, Gartner did some research, and 90% of references will be a reference without any financial compensation. So I'm also against buying advocacy. I don't believe you should buy it. And it's also resource intensive. If you have a awards program where you're giving people points for every reference thing they do, I mean, it can really be like a full-time job. What I do is I have Amazon gift cards. It's not like I don't give out anything. I have Amazon gift cards that I keep on hand for 25 bucks. If it's a really hard reference and I can't find anybody, then I start offering that. Or if it's a press reference that's pretty big, like writing an article, or it's an urgent one they need by tomorrow, which seems like all of them, then I keep some of those gift cards on hand, and I just buy like 1,000 or 2 a quarter and use those up as I need, and it's worked out great at all 4 programs that I've done. As far as managing workload, strategic versus tactical, that is hard. You have your tactical, which is just doing your references, and you have your strategic, staying at a high level, and that's where I think the maturity model that David talked about that his company came up with is very helpful. Set incremental goals. How do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. If you're new to this referencing or you're just getting started, you're not going to have a whole program and have everything implemented in like 30 days. If you have to understand it step by step, relationship by relationship, you're going to build those. Social media. How do you use social media? I use it to promote new deliverables and to share customer success value statements. Social media is a great opportunity for us to promote those and maybe actually become lead gen kind of opportunities. So let's go into some additional resources that are available for you as reference managers. We have the summit, which is March 5th through 6th in Redwood City, and I've been to 4 of those now, and it's so funny. Bill always uses my quote, but I was a reference manager at Landesk my first time for 9 months and just trying to find what I could learn on the web. And then I went to the event and I learned more in 2 days than I did my first 9 months on the job. I'm not kidding. It was so amazing of what I learned. As peers, we have one of the best groups of people that work together. The LinkedIn groups, everybody's always helpful in sharing. There's also some local groups. If you're in the Bay Area, email me and I'll hook you up so you can come to our next meeting. In Boston, there's a gal that runs that, Kara Manfredi. As far as vendors, and you can find a full vendor list on Bill Lee's website. If you need that, just email me as well. I think it's just customerreferenceforum.com, and then the vendors. There's vendors who help consulting, like David's company, Systems. David also does that. Reference fulfillment. There's companies you can hire that'll have a reference desk where they'll take calls and help with references. There's people who help with content and their social media. I also want to mention Bill has a newsletter that he sends out on the blog. And if you don't know, Bill Lee writes for Harvard Business Review. And I put one of his fantastic articles in a box folder I'm going to tell you about in a minute called Customer Reference Programs at the Tipping Point. If you need any information or validation about why customer reference programs are important or that they're exploding, then his article is a very good article for management. So let's talk about the top 5 takeaways. Need to do diligent discovery, utilize the point of reference maturity model, develop a visionary plan, launch your plan right, and leverage the pros and resources. If you remember 5 things, that should be it. We've covered a lot here today, and I just kind of want to end with a challenge. So think about, well, I'm going to wait on that. I have 1 or 2 more slides I want to go over. Okay, so part 2, what are we going to talk about at the summit if you can join us? We're going to talk about 11 best practices, more on metrics, some on social media, reference management systems a little bit more, some more give examples of processes and scripts, collateral and strategic versus tactical. So we're going to dive in a little bit more on what you can do to build your reference program. So we're going to have questions, but first I want to just let you know, if you go to box.com, we have a folder that we set up with today's presentation, and also the Harvard Business Review and some of David's materials that he has put together to help companies build programs. And if you want, our emails are on the screen. You can email David or myself for access to the box folder. So we'll just leave that up for a minute and see if we have any questions that have come in. So let's see. Yes, the slides are available to you, Rob. Those will be in the box folder. Just email David or myself. Let's see. I think that's it. Do we have any questions on the phone? Or any that you want to type there? Okay, so unless anything comes up, David, do you have anything you want to add?
I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to come to this session today. I hope it was useful for everyone, and you have our contact information if you have follow-up questions on any of the information. Happy to help you with that.
And Liz, one question did come in right after you said that. It says, Michelle asks, can you talk about reference programs with partners?
Okay, so Michelle,
yeah.
that's kind of a big topic, so it might be better if you email me and we can talk about that offline. Because reference programs with partners, that's a whole other ballgame, whether that's qualifying their customers or promoting it to partners. So if you don't mind, if you can email me, then I will definitely follow up on that with you. See if anybody else has any questions. Bill, was Bill able to join us?
No, he wasn't. But thanks everyone for joining, and we will have this. It's all recorded. We'll have it up on the website as well, so people can review it later. And I also want to thank GoToWebinar and Citrix for letting us use their awesome software this time. I think this will be our usual format from here on out. So thanks everyone for joining, and have a great afternoon.
Yep. Hope to see you at the summit. Here's my last plug. Thanks, everybody.